I turned the photo around after I finished reading my words and I looked at the teacher and she just had this smile on her face.
I have
And
chills right now.
I was like, what is that? And I was a little scared. And no one really knows the story because I haven't told it before, but that's really why.
What if the key to transformation lies in shifting your perspective? Hi, I'm Dr. Payal Beri. Welcome to Reframing Perspectives. Every conversation here is about one thing: how empathy changes the way we lead, connect, and create impact. Each episode, we get to explore deep, authentic conversations designed to expand your mindset. Whether you're looking to transform your leadership, deepen your relationships within your circle, your community, and friends, or gain clarity in your own personal growth, each episode will inspire you to see things differently and take action. If you're ready to challenge your thinking and embrace transformation, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Today's conversation with Kelly Campbell is for anyone who has been skeptical about just the woo-woo world, who is hit rock bottom, who is questioning if the typical life and the structure of life is exactly what life should be like, or, just wondering like, there's got to be more than this. Hearing Kelly's story is going to really put pause in that, because Kelly was such a textbook person. This is what success looks like, and this is what structure looks like, and this is how you achieve that. And they really, after they hit rock bottom, really reassessed that and really wondered, is this what it is? And how they went from completely being skeptical to embracing a different, complete 180 life that has made them feel more in tune with who they are and has led to a life full of love, confidence, and freedom. Kelly's the author of Heal to Lead, Revolutionizing Leadership Through Trauma Healing. Kelly just spent time with the Dalai Lama last year, where it was really transformational. And their work is deeply embedded in trauma, leadership, and consciousness. If you're wondering if there's more to life than just what you're up to really understanding how to break free from that societal conditioning, this episode's for you.
What's up, Pyle? So good to see you.
So good to see you. I'm so excited to talk to you today because I feel like I met you at a time where like I was going through all of these transitions and it was just like perfect, synergy. And seeing your journey since then and how you have just like continuously if there is anyone who I can say takes the reins of embodiment, it's you. And I feel like a lot of people, including myself, will talk about like, I'm going to lean into myself and I'm going to lean into this. And then there's those hesitations and there's this resistance, or there's the outside noise that comes in and is like, well, should I, and we justify it. But you are like, oh, really? Okay, let me lean in even further. And that's what you bring to people you work with, everyone in your environment. Like you can't help but like want to lean in with you. So I'm just so excited for everyone to hear your journey of how you went from like, this stuff is so woo woo, like, what is this? To like, oh, you want to know what woo is? I'll tell you what woo is. So I'm so excited to get into all of this with you.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun conversation, as it always is with you.
So let's get into it. How did you go from questioning the work and the world that you're in now to really embracing and embodying it?
I think we have to kind of go back to maybe like teenage, early 20s, something like that. The woo-wooest thing that I did at the time was there was an organization called Fellowship of Reconciliation that was offering like Buddhist classes for free or something. And I was like, that's interesting, as a person who grew up in a very Catholic light house, meaning like we went to church on Christmas Eve, I think, like maybe Easter, and really only for the purposes of like getting confirmation and all the boxes that you have to check in that religion. I really pushed against that when I was about 16 and understood more fully what the church was saying. And I didn't even know that I was queer yet. I mean, we can debate that, but I certainly didn't embody that at 16, but I knew that what was being taught didn't resonate. And so I was like, let me just learn a little bit more about a different religion or a different way of life, or just maybe I'm more interested in spirituality than I am religion. And I
Mm.
sort of made that distinction. So I would say that's probably like the first moment, but that was in my very early 20s, maybe 20 years old, 21. And I started my cause marketing agency at 23. So I feel like I almost, in a way, got cut off from that pretty quickly and went into that hustle culture, build the business, that whole productivity mindset as a, I would say self identified type A. It was really hard to unravel and get out of that mindset. So anything that looked like something that I couldn't explain or something that was a little too spiritual or was a little too fringe was not for me because I wanted to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
And that perception was really important to me because it was about competence, it was about reputation, and I was here to prove to myself, prove to my mother, prove to the world that I mattered and I was valuable. So anything that would put me sort of on the fringes or associated with the fringes, I didn't want any part of that. I mean, my entire life is fringe now. So it's not like a straight path to get there. It never is, right? This is anytime you get into healing work or empathetic leadership or self reflection or compassion work, which, I'd probably put Buddhism in that category. It's just this very kind of meandering path. And you start picking up a little bit more, you start moving toward what resonates with you, what feels like alignment in your body. And I wish that I figured that out a little bit sooner. I'm only 45, but I do think I wish that I figured that out a little bit sooner because I spent 14 years locked into this. I don't know, I want to call it like a death grip of like business ownership and trying to do the right thing by my employees and trying to, I don't know, just do all the things that
Yeah,
everyone
all the
expects.
things that are ingrained in us from capitalism, the corporate, right? This is the path to success. We're just indoctrined into that from school, and our families believe in that, lean into that. So it's like, again, if you go off, that means it's like, what are you doing? So this is not the path of success. You're taking a risk that is not real, but it's what we're taught to believe.
Right. So in my mind, it was like success meant scalability, whether that was the head count of my agency, the names of the clients we were working with, in terms of recognizability, revenue goals, hitting all of these like KPIs that I really, really thought that they mattered.
Yeah.
And I think as I got to a place of really overwhelm and burnout at such a young age, I sold my company at 36 years old. It was
Wow.
almost 10 years ago now. Looking back, I was pretty much like a shell of who I am now. I don't even recognize that person. I had tacked on about 40 pounds. I was working, I was the first one in the office, the last one to leave, working on weekends. You know this better than anyone in the world. You pour your heart and soul and everything you are into one thing, and then you identify as that thing. In my case, it was as a CEO. And I lost my identity in that. And I got so almost like, when you go maybe swimming in the ocean or something, and a wave kind of comes that you're not really expecting, and you get maybe you fall, you get sort of caught up in that swept up under the in that tide. That's what it felt like, right? And I didn't see it at the time because it was just my normal. And I think so many people are in that churn, right? Where they're like hitting their head on the sand and it's like, and
Yeah.
now I get back up and just go in and do it again every single day. So I think I needed to hit what was sort of emotional, and I wouldn't call it physical rock bottom, but it was definitely emotional or psychological rock bottom for me to say, wait, this is not working. I don't know what I'm meant to do or what I'm going to do next, but I know that this is destroying my health, my mental health, my marriage. It was destroying my life. And on the outside, it was very successful.
Right.
All my employees were happy. We
Yeah.
were making a ton of money. We had great clients that we were doing beautiful work for in the nonprofit space and social impact. So I thought everyone was going to look at me like I was crazy when I said, I want to sell this company. I don't want to do this anymore.
You know, this is a thing that I question all the time is that why do we need to hit rock bottom for us to even think about that, right? Like about like what am I doing to myself? And I find it like it really is that. Like it's every story. Like, you know, you hear these eye bankers that go from like burnout to becoming yogis, right? And it's just it's
Mhm.
this idea that like we have to hit rock bottom before we will shake things up if we even do. Because sometimes we get to rock bottom, we're like, whoa, 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 what just happened here? I need to shift something. But then we like get to like, you know, a little bit of that balance out again. And
Mm.
then we just go do the same thing again.
Yeah.
Right. And I think like I see this all the time within, you know, my friend circles and just like my colleagues where we'll burn out and then we think that by just changing what we're doing in terms of whether it's industry or like oh I'm going to change my path of career that that is going to help alleviate this burnout, but it's like no, you actually haven't dealt with the actual core root issues of why, because you're
Yeah.
just going to go repeat the same thing. So people who tell me like oh I was such a workaholic and I ended up in the hospital because of burnout and all this stuff, and then I'm like they're like oh but now I don't do that, I've got this business, I'm doing this, I'm like but you're working till late, you're doing all these like, you're repeating the pattern and you're just not seeing it. And then people don't necessarily always see that, oh, my physical illness is because of the way that I'm functioning. They just think of like, oh, well, you know, heart disease runs in my family, so that's where this is. Pop a couple pills, keep going. There's such compartmentalization of
Mhm.
our like mental, physical, spiritual, everything lives, and so it's like we're not actually taking ownership over looking at us
Yeah.
objectively, right? We're literally just surviving.
Yeah.
And somehow we think we're winning in that.
Yeah. I did. I thought I was.
Yeah.
Until I was like until I hit that point. Something that you said just struck me. I was thinking, you said, like, "Why do we have to hit rock bottom?"
Yeah.
I almost feel like hitting rock bottom as, like, a business owner in this story that we're sharing, which is such a shared experience, it's almost like that's, like, a microcosm of what's going on in America right now. It's like we have to hit rock bottom before we're gonna change anything drastically, meaningfully. I don't wanna get into a political conversation, but just the
But is that a
juxtaposition
human
of
behavior
that.
thing? Like, is that like humans, like for evolution purposes, for everything? It's like that is just something that has to happen. Like, we just, as much as we talk about wanting to be preventative, like we're just suckers and just going to always be reactive.
I don't know if I would say it's suckers. I would say it's part of the human condition. Like, my belief, and this is not maybe everyone's belief, of course, but my belief is that we signed up for this,
Right.
right? Like, we opted in. We were like, "We're gonna come down here and incarnate in these bodies, these, like, human meat suits, and go through these experiences of, like, rock bottom and really high highs and experience the whole," this is where we're getting woo now, experience the whole spectrum of human emotion, because that's why we're actually here. That's what actually makes us feel alive. That's the whole
Mhm.
purpose of it.
Yeah.
It's not to like make $1 billion and oppress everyone else. It's just not. That's
Right.
not success.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, you know, that's the part where I'm wondering then, is it just this is a human conditioning, AKA learned behavior? And so if we were to somehow, you know, all of us who believe in like we can be preventative, like we can, you know, we can function differently. If we were to do that, you know, could that actually change the way then that we as a society globally as humans function? Like, I mean, if you think about it, like, you know, if we go to look at Bhutan, right?
Mhm.
Bhutan, they don't even really use the GDP. They use like, you know, their happiness indicator.
Right. Right.
And, you know, they truly are a very peaceful place. And they
Mhm.
are actually a very successful place too. You know, even to the point where from what I understand, that even if you live in the mountains in a very like secluded place, you still have the same access to medical care that someone who lives in a more populated village does. And they have the resources to be able to get you and bring you and get you the resources that you need in that same way. They really put people first
Yeah.
there and they work from that intention. So,
Hmm.
I mean, isn't that a case study?
Of course it's possible.
Yeah.
Of course it's possible. But in this country in particular, the construct does not, that's not where we're at. And maybe we do have to hit rock bottom. I don't know what that is. I'm not making any predictions, but maybe we do have to hit that in order to rebuild it in a way that is actually sustainable for us and not, this kind of divisive,
Yeah.
separatist, individualistic,
Yeah.
society. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah,
But to go back to your story, right? So
yeah.
you hit rock bottom, burnt out, and then you started exploring. So how did you then move even more forward towards where you are today?
Yeah, so I sold the company, I
Mhm.
guess it was toward the end of 2016. So there was just an alignment in the timing of like, okay, my first thought was like, okay, what am I going to do next? Right? But I was so tired. I was so exhausted emotionally, physically, spiritually, you name it, that I didn't actually have it in me to start something again. And I had a non compete, which meant that I couldn't contact any of my old clients. I couldn't become the partner of an existing agency, and I couldn't restart another agency in the same field. So I had those handcuffs on and exhaustion. And I think that was a little bit of a divine recipe because I took a step back, and instead of saying, like, what new thing can I build? It was like, you know what? I think I'm going to take a pause and actually look inward because I wrote down a few questions that should have been easy questions for me to answer, I thought, and I couldn't answer them. And it was more about my interiority. Who was I really? What brought me joy? What was I good at? How was I perceived by others, for those things that weren't productivity based or, success metrics like that? And I couldn't answer those questions. And so, as the universe would have it, someone came into my life and asked me to do a little branding project, and it happened to be for a metaphysical shop. Literally was rolling my eyes as I was doing this project because I was like, of course, I'm like anti woo woo at that time. I'm like, of course, the universe is like such a tricky little thing.
Yeah.
And it's going to put this project in front of me. And of course, this metaphysical shop couldn't pay the rate that I was asking. So they gave me they paid partially in classes.
Wow.
So I was like, fine, I'll take these
The
stupid classes.
universe is opening the door.
And I remember, I don't know if I've ever shared this story before, a little vulnerable, but that's okay. I remember being in one of these classes, and it was about I don't know what you would call them, your meta gifts. And
Mhm.
one of the exercises in the class, there were about 8 people in the class, and the exercise was there was a photo, or we weren't even told it was a photo. There was a piece of paper of some type inside of a manila envelope, so completely opaque. And we were each given one of these envelopes, and we had to just hold the envelope in our hands. And then we were given a separate piece of paper and a pen, and we had to write down the things that came to us. So I wrote down maroon, um, no jewelry, and I'm literally writing these words like I don't know where they're coming from. Bald, I thought maybe like bald eagle, and maybe like 2 other words, right? And so the exercise was we had to go around the circle, hold up the piece of paper, whatever it was, so that the group could see it, and then read our words. But we weren't allowed to see the photo as, right? So we're looking at the people's expressions.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So I'm holding up my photo, I read my words, and everyone's jaw is on the floor because the photo was a group of young Buddhist monks, very young, like 10, 11, 12 years old, all with shaved heads, all in maroon robes, obviously not wearing any jewelry. And I turned the photo around after I finished reading my words, and I looked at the teacher, and she just had this smile on her face.
I have
And
chills right now.
I was like, what is that? And I was a little scared
Yeah.
because I was like, that's a fluke. I don't know how that happened, but like we went on to do other exercises in these different kind of like realms, and I didn't even know what to call it. But I have a thing. I
Yeah.
found out I have a thing. And so metacognition became ultimately what I called my blog. And no one really knows the story because I haven't told it before, but that's really why I had the name Metacognition as my blog. So anyway, that really opened the door for me in terms of these modalities or these things that I couldn't explain, but I was in. I was all in
So
because
that moment is literally what went from anti-woo to
I think so. I
wow.
think so because there was a proving. I
Mm,
needed somebody to prove to me
right.
that there was something more at play here. And
Mhm.
so then I started getting more into energy work and going to different practitioners, craniosacral therapists and Reiki and all these things. So I think, over the last 8 years, that journey has been like I've been sort of tiptoeing my way into going to these practitioners and then wondering what it would be like to become one of these practitioners. And of course, lots of self doubt and a lot of imposter syndrome. And it's all gone. That imposter syndrome is gone because this just is. And I feel like this is my third or fourth or fifth coming out about this is who I am. This is part of my composition. And I love doing that kind of work. I love coaching. And there is an intuitive component to the
Mhm.
coaching that I do.
Mhm.
I love doing energy integration, right? Which some people can talk about in terms of Reiki and things like that. But I think it's more than that. And now I'm bringing that into platonic touch work, which is cuddle therapy. Again, these things have for many years been very much on the fringe. Probably all of that started to come up around probably 2016, which I don't know. That's kind of interesting to me as
Yeah.
well. So all of these things, I just feel like my path was sort of being laid out in front of me, and it was just up to me to kind of navigate it. And it feels like the easiest thing in the world now. It feels like breathing.
Wow. That's so powerful. It's like you really truly, and like I started saying, is like you leaned in and
Yeah.
you allowed whatever was percolating around you to just like learn from it and peel
Mhm.
back some of those belief systems that were leading you down a path that would have just been absolutely miserable and bringing you
Well,
here.
I knew that the alternative wasn't working for me. I burned
Right,
out at 36. So I was like,
right.
well, what's the total opposite of
Yeah,
like being a type A, uber perfectionist, like
yeah,
so uncomfortable with failure, so uncomfortable with experimentation,
yeah.
right? It's like, what's the opposite of that?
So how does somebody who is type A struggles with, failure, who just for them having a productive goal is like the ultimate, win, right? Like everything has to have a goal that I'm working towards. Even fun, right? Fun has to have there's a goal, there's an agenda with this fun that I'm doing. I had this fun today and that was great and that was a success measure, right? It's like how do you take someone like that with your work now as a coach and, providing all this the support that you do with leaders, not everyone's going to have that type of experience immediately, like the way you did. So, how do you take someone who is just really entrenched into that space to come over like an inch?
Well, I'll clarify that it was not immediate. I mean,
Yeah,
this has been over the last 8 years
sure.
for me. But in the grand scheme of time, that is kind of a blip. I would say it's a lot of compassionate inquiry, right? It's a lot of reflecting and reframing perspective, full circle, to get them to understand and see,
Mhm,
right? I had a conversation literally this morning with a client who we were talking about her purpose. And she's like, I think my purpose in life is to be useful. And I was like, oh, interesting.
mhm,
Is being useful something that brings you joy?
mhm.
What about being useful brings you joy? And she's like, well, not that many things. I like the outcomes of the utility, but I don't like the actual tasks. But if I'm not useful, then I might as well just die. And I was like, oh, so like reflecting back once I let her
Yeah,
explain all of that, it was like, can I share what I'm hearing? And I had just written down a few things in her words. And when you reflect back sometimes to someone, they're like, wow, I didn't realize I said it like that. That doesn't actually feel good. And then you kind of build on that with really just open-ended questions and getting people to help shift their own mindsets, because no one's going to listen to someone else if she said, oh, my purpose is being useful, and I said it shouldn't be that.
Mhm.
She's just going to fight.
Right.
That's not,
Yeah.
that's not what we're
You're
here for.
building more walls and defensiveness with that.
Yeah. So my purpose, and I think the purpose of all good coaches, is to help people arrive at those, maybe I'll call them like mindset shifts or choice points or something on their own, right? And so my job is really just to like help them translate what's really on their hearts or unresolved in their bodies or both, and get them to see that it could be a societal construct. It could be intergenerational trauma that's making them think that. It could be, all sorts of different things. But I really want to know what is true for them when we kind of peel off all of those really sticky layers. What's true for them underneath? And I'm really good at getting under the surface. I'm a double Scorpio.
Oh
So
gosh, yeah. Okay.
always
Enough said.
really, um, but you have to be willing to do that. And I do make it fun.
Yes.
I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything that people would be running from, but it is hard work.
Yeah.
It's
It's a
maybe I won't
commitment.
use the word hard. I would say it's deep. It's deep
Yeah.
work.
It's deep and it's a commitment to yourself, right? Which I think
Mhm.
that that is one of the reasons why sometimes the work of doing internal healing, because it requires a discipline and it requires this, commitment to it. And I think a lot of people lack discipline and they lack the ability to keep sustaining and going through the hard moments. And because again, as humans, we want to have things that are path of least resistance.
Mhm.
And what's interesting with that is like the path of least resistance is actually the thing that's creating the most resistance. And the thing that is would actually be internally like more at peace is, yeah, there's a little bit of that, like you have to go through the forest to get to the light. How do you get somebody to start seeing and connecting the dots in their life to seeing that, oh, wait a second, these issues that have been happening are no different than when I'm in my work and when I'm
Yeah.
trying to be a leader, when I'm trying to, you know, get my team to be engaged, but then that's exactly the thing that is I'm getting pushback on it and I don't, there's resistance to there. So like how do you get them to see and connect the dots?
Yeah. So we start with one area of their life. For me, it's going to be as a trauma informed leadership coach, we're going to be talking about probably the workplace or probably how they're leading in that workplace. The things that they're encountering in that organization, their behaviors are their behaviors. They're the same human, right? So we might talk about how they're showing up with a particular colleague that is maybe projecting some stuff on them, and it's activating
Mhm.
a younger part of them, and they're sort of reactive in that way. And then we might correlate that to something that was said last session or earlier in this particular session where they had a fight with their significant other. And my job, I feel like, is to kind of make those connection points. And again, this is back to the reflection, right? Do you see how what happened with this colleague was very similar to how you showed up with your wife?
Mm,
Oh, I never thought about it like that. Do you see how when you reacted this way, this is what you were met with and how that's similar there? You actually showed up the same way in both these situations, which makes sense because this
yeah.
is activating a young part of you. Let's go back maybe to that young part of you and do some work with that younger version, that maybe that inner child. So it can look like that. I mean, it really depends on what the situation is, right? But that's where I'm sort of like
Yeah.
connecting those dots and leaning into the intuitive parts of the work together.
Hi, so I'm pausing the episode for a quick moment and for a quick favor. If you haven't already, if you could just click subscribe, leave a review wherever you're listening to this episode, it would be really helpful. The only way we can know to make sure that we provide the right type of podcast episodes, the right type of guests, and to make sure that we're delivering the type of content that you actually want to hear, it's through your reviews and through your support. Thanks. And now back to the episode.
When you're working with, I can imagine just even in these years, as you keep continuing to deepen your, understanding of the different modalities that you use with your clients, I think it's just so powerful to recognize that, like, you know, there are not every modality is going to work with the same with every person, right? And that's
Yes.
why having these different variables, it's like those tools in your tool bucket is going to help like meeting people with where they're at.
Yep.
I want to know, as you have been doing that with your clients, like what has that involvement been for you? Like as the work that you're doing with your clients, what has that reflected back for you in your own internal healing work that you continue to do?
Mm, that's a really, really good question. I think it's every time I deepen a particular modality, or I have a recognition that, like, oh, we actually are not going to be able to go in this direction. We have to go in this other direction. It's a reflection back to me, A, that I need to trust my intuition more,
Mhm.
right? And that's a constant. It's developing that connection with source, with intuition, to really rely on it. So that's part of it. I would say another part of it is just stretching my own edges of what my comfort level is, right? Because I have a particular way I work, a set of modalities, and sometimes we need to blend modalities, or sometimes we need to work a little bit outside of what a particular modality is offering. And so getting creative with this kind of work, any kind of healing work or things like that, I think that pushes my edges because, I said before I was a double Scorpio. I'm a Capricorn moon. If you know anything about astrology, Capricorns are like very focused,
Yeah.
very, actually, maybe even a little bit rigid, right?
Mhm.
I think that's a goat, right?
Yeah,
Capricorn.
mountain goat.
So mountain goats, we are stubborn, right? We're like, this is the way to do it.
Yeah,
So
don't
for
stop until
me,
you achieve it.
that's right. So
Mhm.
for me, the edge there has been, how can I soften?
Mm.
How can I maybe have more interplay, more fluidity with how I am working with a particular person? That's actually been really fun. Whereas before I would have been very resistant, I've noticed a softening
Yeah.
over that time.
Do you believe, because I believe this, is that whenever you're working with clients in any kind of scope of work that you're doing, oftentimes you're faced with the clients that are going to be mirroring things that you are experiencing yourself. And you're like, huh, interesting. Like that's happening. I'll be honest, that's happening to me right now, where I have a client that I'm working with who has a lot of, rumination tendencies and a lot of overthinking tendencies, but they also are uh, definitely ADD. And so you see all these things tying in, right? And that is a element of myself that I have recently in the last couple of years realized about myself, the ADD part. And I'm seeing then how all of this plays in. But for myself, I'm like, oh, whatever. And then when I see it in someone else, I'm like, oh, wow, that's what it looks like to deal with from the external, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh," and it's, like, forcing me to reflect so much about how I show up, and it's almost like I accepted the fact that, like, "Oh, I've got this," but then it's like, "But am I working through that? Like, am I actually?" And I think that that's one of the challenges with the world that we live in is that we intellectualize so much of emotional intelligence, and we intellectualize self-awareness, so we recognize it, we understand the definitions of it, we identify it, but we don't actually work through the things. And that's why when people are like, well, I understand this, so why aren't things changing? It's like because you haven't worked through it in your
Right.
body, right?
Right. Right. It's the same thing as, like, if you don't allow, when you start crying, if you immediately shut it down and you don't allow the emotion to move through your body and come to a completion, then you're just storing that,
Yeah.
right? So it's the same process. You have to move through things.
Yeah. I would imagine that a lot of it is also like having to redefine what that means, right? Like crying for men, for example, is
Mhm.
a sign of weakness in our society. And we're slowly shifting that, very slowly shifting that. Um, but that is, something where it's like, it's okay to cry. It's okay to like let that emotion out, right? Like
Mhm.
men tend to have higher risk of depression through loneliness because they don't speak up, they don't have a community they can lean on unless they're partnered up and they talk to their partner about everything, but they don't have anything external, they're stigmatized with therapy, like, oh, I don't know about this. So I think it's even just that process of redefining for ourselves, like, what does that mean for me to be able to accept this different version of myself?
That's one of my favorite questions. Like, what are you making that mean about yourself?
Yeah.
Right? When someone says, "Oh, I'm noticing this," or it's like, "Okay,
Yeah.
what are you making that mean about yourself?"
Yeah.
It's a great question.
And I think that, and I'd love to hear your parts about this, is that one of the elements that I think a lot of people don't talk about, especially in this space, right? You hear so many people talking about like embody yourself, like lean into yourself, do all these things, and look at like this next version of yourself that's so in peace. But no one talks about the grief that also comes with this. Like there is legitimate grief about letting go of that version that has been on this like hamster wheel or whatever version it is, the loss of friendships, the loss of relationships, the readjustment, and the adjustment period of those like relationships that are around you, the sacrifice, right? Like we don't talk about the sacrifice that goes into evolving into a more embodied self. And I'd love for you to like talk about that for your own personal experience of what that was like for you
Yeah.
and also what you have seen in like your clients.
Yeah, I think grief is the hardest of all emotions. And I saw something the other day that I really liked, which was grief is love with no place to go.
Oh, that's yeah.
I loved it because grief I think of as a portal. I feel like grief is the way through to actually fully feeling love, like on levels that we actually don't get to experience on a daily basis. Grief is a portal to creativity,
Mm,
right? Because the more that you're stifled and stuck and like you don't even know why, I think grief it has a big component to play there. And we're not taught in this society how to grieve or that grief is okay.
mhm.
When someone dies, for example, there's a time limit. We're in companies, what do you get? Maybe 2 days bereavement. It's
Yeah,
like, get over your grief in 48 hours. It
exactly.
doesn't work like that, right? But we're not even talking about when people die. I mean, that's a thing unto itself.
Mhm.
We're talking about when parts of you die,
Yes.
right? When you, let's say, were unkind to your body at certain points and you did some really aggressive dieting or yo-yo dieting because you hated your body so much. You get to a point at some point through the healing journey, maybe, where you're like, oh, I'm so happy. I feel so good in my body. I accept it for what it is now. But no one talks about, you're right, the grief of the experience of hating your body that much during those periods, right? And how you didn't tend to yourself. Um, I mean, I will be very honest that grief was one of the hardest things for me to really I wrestled with it. I literally like arm wrestled it because I didn't know how to grieve. I was so disconnected and dissociated from that particular emotion because it wasn't really I didn't think it was accessible to me. So when I was about, I think it was a few years ago now, so maybe 42, I embarked on this project called 40 Years of Grief. And I opened up a Google Doc one day and I just started like stream of consciousness, all of the things that knew that I had never grieved, going backwards from that age back to the divorce at 40, the mother who opted out of my life at 24, every single thing I could possibly think of. And then because my brain is very organized, I put it in chronological order. And that was how I started this Google Doc. And I wrote a little bit because that's all I could really touch was just writing maybe a sentence about each one. What did I remember about that time period? And every once in a while, when I think about one of those things, I'll go back and write a little bit more. So it's kind of like an ongoing process for me.
That's really powerful.
Yeah, for me, it's like that is the hardest one. That is the
Yeah.
hardest one for me. I think that's also why it's easy for me to engage with people in their grief.
Mhm.
Very easy for me. I feel very comfortable with very big emotion. And so it's easier for me to sort of hold space for that. But when it comes to my own grief, that's more difficult. So that's something that I'm actually actively working on.
That's so interesting, right? And I think that that is when I used to be a therapist, I remember a lot of my therapist friends. One of the reasons why they were so successful as therapists was because they, you know, I'll kind of say like distracted their own stuff by focusing on their client stuff.
Yeah,
And but
makes
they
sense.
were engaging in the thing that they struggled with the most too.
Mhm.
And I find that to be just like so true. And I always say this, it's like you always know and can kind of get a sense of anyone who goes into the field of healing, you can get a pretty good sense of what they struggled with based off of what they focus on.
Yep.
You know, it's like, okay, I got it. Like I see where your trauma lies, right? It's and once they heal that trauma, you suddenly see them be like, yeah, I kind of got bored of that like specialization, so I moved on to this. It's like,
Yeah.
oh no, you healed that part of you, and so now you're moving on. So in a way, I kind of find that energy of like healer and the patient, client, whatever, who's being healed, like there's a symbiotic relationship going on there where it's like
Of
the
course.
healer is being healed by the patient as much as the patient is being healed by the healer.
Yeah,
You know, and so
that's very true.
the grief part, right, which is so hard to understand, fathom, and like really hold on to that is because it's so painful.
Mhm.
And so it's so interesting that you're able to hold that emotion for everybody else, but when it comes to yourself, even though you've created that. And was thinking that when you were talking about this document, to me, that makes so much sense to your book, Heal to Lead, right? Like so much of what you're talking about, you've written about it and you've shared it with the world because it's really understanding. And I say this a lot is just, and I want to know your take on it is like, before you can really be there for others, right? You have to understand yourself and you got
Mhm.
to meet yourself where you're at with recognizing that it's an ever evolving journey. Like you're never going to be 100% healed, you know, and I think it's also about acceptance. Like it's,
Yeah.
you know, like I've had people ask me like, okay, well, do I have to go down this laundry list of all these issues I have with myself? And it's just like, no, that's not the point.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people will say, like, well, the way that you're making this sound is like, I have to be fully healed before I can get into a relationship, right? A healthy relationship. Or I have to be fully healed before I can go back into the workplace and be an effective leader.
Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about at all. I think getting rid of that idea of perfection or idealism, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about just putting one foot on the path, right? Opening up that crack just 1%, that self awareness, that self reflection, that pausing, right? Responding instead of reacting.
Mhm.
That's all we're looking for because once you have that tiny little bit, we can work with that and we can expand that little by little. That's why we call it a journey, right? It's not just like a let's get this done, get it done completely. I think that's where I was talking a little bit earlier about that edge for me, where it's
Mhm.
like I as a former CEO, as a former type A, as a Capricorn moon, like I want it all done. I want it done perfectly. It's got to be done this way. And I just had to let all of that go. I think at one point you asked, like, how do you kind of relinquish these things? I think for me, that particular part, which I would label ego, I think a lot of that fell away about 3 years ago during an ayahuasca journey.
Mhm.
It was the first time I had engaged with the psychedelic. I am a proponent of them when used non recreationally,
Yeah.
when used in ceremony, when used with people who actually make the medicine, for healing purposes. And it helped me to sort of like dissolve a lot of that. I'm not going to say I'm egoless because that's impossible, but I think it's dissolved a lot of that for me. And I don't have to hold so tightly to all of these things anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, a lot of people are, will say that, okay, I've got to resolve XYZ before I start dating again. I have to do this before I can even consider this. And it's like, so then you're approaching this work with the same type A mindset, right?
Yeah.
That black and white, all or nothing that we're so good at doing. And it really is starting to just honor little by little, like, what if you just started? And it's like, and the
Yeah.
thing is that that mindset, which I'm such a definitely, I do it a lot, is I have to have X before I do Y. The idea with that is you're almost sheltering yourself from going through the environment of it, right? Like the only way to heal certain things is that you can't do it in an incubator. You have to do it in the real world because you may perfect it like when you're, for example, like for me, like when you're single, you're like, "Oh, I'm great to be around. Like I'm easy to be around. Like this is fun. This is great." Yeah, I've healed these elements of myself. Like, I'm so secure, but then you get into a relationship and that's the environment to really test like, are you actually healed? Are you actually
Yeah, when he's not texting you back in 14 hours, how healed are you?
right, right? So it's those elements like even with the workplace, right? And I think about it as I believe very strongly about the words that we say really is the energy that you're then feeding back into yourself. So the more that I know in the last few years, I would always say, oh, I hate corporate. I like corporate is just like this itchy wool sweater I'm wearing, and it's just uncomfortable. And then I wonder, like, why am I not getting corporate clients? Right. It's just this like, there's that energy of just like what you're putting out is what
Yeah.
then you're receiving in. And it's the same idea that, even if I had one really horrible micromanager that led me out, it's like I now reflect on it differently and be like, oh, because of that, it led me to this world that I am just so proud to be a part of. So, in fact, I have just so much gratitude for that experience.
Yeah.
And I can recognize now how I'm going to actually engage. Like, I love my clients that I have now. Like, I actually, enjoy that element of what I can provide to my corporate clients in the way that I do. But it really is. And I think that too many of us want to heal in private and want to heal behind closed doors. But then when it comes to the real world, we become fragile.
Yeah. So this is why I love doing healing retreats, either in as an attendee or as a facilitator, because healing in community, doing this work with other leaders is so potent. It's so powerful to do this work more visibly, to do this work with peers. There's an element of vulnerability that you just cannot get when you're sitting there, let's say in a therapy session, one on one behind closed doors.
Hmm.
So, yeah, this year I'm doing 4 different retreats, and this is the first year I'm doing retreats. So I'm like, here
Oh,
we go. Next year it might be 10, whatever it is. But I think that the potency, and especially, just bringing community together right now, I think is the most important thing
yeah,
that we can do. So I'm really leaning into that. And yeah, like you said, you can't do that behind closed doors. It's just not as effective because you're not going to get the interplay
yeah,
of how people might activate you, or just the vulnerability factor of doing, let's say, a paired exercise in a room with other people also doing paired exercises. Like just that unto itself
yeah.
is, it requires a level of courage, and it helps you flex these muscles that
Mhm.
you can't do on your own.
Yeah. I'm going to say something that I know you're going to laugh at, but like when you're talking about this, I feel like it's like this is what I would describe as like the woo meeting the reality. It really is using those practices that normalize, those different coping strategies and the different emotional elements of ourselves and putting it into environments where it's like this is your day to like it's simulating your day to day. It's simulating your experiences and it's like how am I going to move through this differently. And I think this is the important part is that no one is saying that quit your job and go become a yogi or quit your job and start a business and all these things. It's more of
Unless
like,
you want to.
unless you want to, right? Absolutely. But if you're someone who's like, I love what I do, I just hate how it makes me feel, or I hate how it's taking a toll on my family or it's how I'm operating in this and like it's got to be different. I always say to them like it can be different. You absolutely can shift the way that you function, you work, you operate in the space, but you've got to know how to move through that and hold space for that for yourself. right? Detaching from the external noises that happen is like a huge part of it, because then we just become reactionary. Like, I think the Lego movie is like literally one of my favorite movies, because it just, if people haven't watched a Lego movie, they need to watch it, because it's like, it truly is. It's like that person is just like going about their day. This is how you do it every day cycle. And then they wake up one day and they realize, wait a second, what am I part of? And I think that's what the work that you do is. It's disrupting in a good way, in a positive light of, you're doing something every day. You're kind of trained to not think. You're trained to follow. And here is something that's disrupting for you to be able to be like, oh, I can still do this, but I can do it in a way that feels good now.
I think it's disruptive to remind people that they have agency.
Yes.
And it's disruptive to remind people of the power that is inside of them,
Hmm.
because I think that we're sort of programmed to forget it. And the work that you're doing, the work that I'm doing, is helping to sort of remove those masks and sort of deprogram that a bit,
Yeah.
to say, you are actually sitting on your power. I know that you can't see it right now, but I'm going to help you see it. I think that's the most potent part of the work that we do.
Absolutely. And there is a sense of freedom and this, like, I will say it, like this, like, ongoing audible sigh that you keep taking, because once you get to that next level and you realize, like, wait a second, what I considered to be freedom, what I considered to be leading me to this place of like me having control over my life, was actually controlling me. And by elevating that, it really is this audible sigh of like, oh wow, like now it's like I don't let these noises distract me, and I'm able to just stay on track of doing what I got to do, and I'm not having these emotional ups and downs on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, that's affecting essentially like what my power is in me to like service the world. And I think that your book, Heal to Lead, your work as a coach, I mean, I've worked with you. We had our session like a couple of years ago, and it was one of the most transformational, powerful, times. It's so filled with so much compassion. And I think that's one of the other pieces that is missed, because we are trained to be so hard and critical on ourselves. When compassion is there, we see it as like this like uncomfortable thing. It's like, what are you doing? Like, stop being, compassionate. But it's like when you actually allow that in, and that's what you do so well, you start realizing like, wait a second, the softness is actually more powerful and beautiful.
You got it. I mean, I couldn't have said that any better. I think it's that receiving muscle, right? It's why so many people have a lot of wounding around money, because they actually have wounding around the flexing of receiving. Some people it's giving, some people it's power, some people it's pleasure. We call it money, but money is just the currency. But really, what's happening underneath the surface, this is actually what we're going to be doing at our retreat in April. Part of it is going to be healing money wounds and also doing a lot of like transformative leadership work, inner work. But yeah, it's so difficult for people to receive whatever it is, whether it's a compliment. Think about how many women you know who are terrible
Yeah.
at receiving compliments.
Oh yeah. Immediately it's, you say something nice and it's like, oh, thank you. Oh, but you look great. Like they can't just sit with thank you.
It's that, or it's, oh, this old thing, or
Yeah.
this old dress, I've had it for years, or
Yeah.
no, it's an old lipstick, or it's whatever,
Right.
right? There's always a
Minimizing.
justification
Hmm.
because of it's actually just the discomfort of receiving. And
Hmm.
again, that can be as something as seemingly simple as a compliment, which is actually, there's a lot tied up underneath that. Or it can be money, or it can be other gifts, or it can be a service a kindness that someone's doing for you. And that discomfort, there's so much information in the level of discomfort that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited about your retreats. I mean, I need to know more about those for sure. And, you've just the calmness that you bring in, and again, just even this conversation, like there's just such groundedness and just like everything. If there's one thing that you would want everyone who's listening to this to reframe their perspective on, what would that be?
Hmm. Oh, that's a good one. That's a juicy one to wrap up with. Um, I would want people to reframe their perspective on their capacity to love. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think that we all have a greater capacity to love than we give ourselves credit for, or that we think we have time to focus on. And what I mean by that is many times it's easy for us to think about how we love our partner or how we love our children or a favorite coworker who feels like, an at work wife or, something like that. Maybe parents. But our capacity to love is so much bigger than that. And I think it's almost like we have these little horse blinders on. Like, these are my loved ones. We use the term loved ones, right? These are the people I love. And then these are my coworkers. And then these are these people out here in this group who I don't really have an association with.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we started understanding that there is no limit to our capacity to love other people and to be connected to other people, this world would be a very different place. So that's what I would want people to reframe their perspective on.
Can like I have no words. And I have a lot of words usually. I have no words. I That is just so poetic and beautiful and truly is. And the thing that was coming to my mind is like how many I have friends or just even myself, like sometimes where it's like we say we want these things. And I've, recently been talking to a couple friends about this. I'm like, you say you want this, but do you believe that you deserve it?
Mm.
And I think that deserving of that like comes from the place of love and compassion and how much space you have to really hold that. So
Yeah, because what you're talking about is actually self-love, which
yeah,
we didn't even talk about in that
yeah,
example. Right? I mean, literally, we have to, like you said before, we have to learn how to lead ourselves before we can lead others. We have to learn how to love ourselves much, much more fully than we do right now so that we can love everyone else that much better.
absolutely.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that's where it all starts.
100%.
Yeah.
Kelly, thank you so much. Like this
Thank
was, I
you.
could keep going and on and on. We're definitely gonna have to do a part two because we didn't touch on so many things like self-love and, just other deeper experiences with like the broken parts of us that to lead to self-acceptance and stuff. But we'll get into
We
those
can do a whole episode just on that.
100%, 100%. But thank you so much. This was so lovely. And I'm so excited for people to, we're going to have all the resources there for how to find you and how to connect with you because having you in anyone's orbit is truly a privilege.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I received that. I believe you. And thank you for doing the show. I think it's incredible, the conversations that you're having here.
Thanks.
I really hope that you enjoy this episode, and I just have one favor to ask you. If you could just make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a rating and review, it's going to help us tremendously to make sure that we reach as many people as possible that you think should be listening to our episodes. I'll see you next week for another episode, and thank you so much for leaving that one review, that one subscription, and sharing this with your friends.